Welcome to the latest instalment of the Astrakhan's Feather. I'm talking a bit quickly because people, it seems, leave this after only 22 seconds. We're up to 9 seconds now. Stick with it. It's murder, mystery, it's mayhem. What more could you want, right? So just stick with it. Have a bit of attention span. People have attention span of a gnat. All right, we've lost most people by now. Anyway, this is the Astrakhan's Feather, and this is episode 17, I think. And what we're going to talk about is what's happening right now in the Astrakhan's Feather. But just a quick recap for those people who are still hanging around. Steve Christ, he's an inspector at Bone Mountain, right? It's a little place in the Blue Mountains, or just in the foothills of the Blue Mountains. And he's on sick leave. His wife has died, Jenny, died mysteriously, right? We don't know what's happening about that yet. Also, Armand Dreyfus has disappeared. He's the editor of the local newspaper, The Record, and his daughter, Holly Dreyfus, who's a journalist there, she's looking for him and searching for him, doesn't know where he's gone, but it's something suspicious. What happens also is Ray Lucas, local colourful identity, is killed when his car crashes in a bit of a storm, and he's picked up a young girl called Glory Rich, who happens to be collateral damage, as they can say. Who's killed Ray? Why is he being killed? Gloria, poor girl, is there in the passenger seat. She also is deceased. Karen Allen, who's standing in for Christ, is from the UK. She's just come over here. She fancies a bit of a change. There's another reason why she's here, but we won't reveal that yet. Anyway, there we go. I'm not going to fill in any more just at the moment. But what we're going to do is we meet another character now. He's called Trevor Aisbett. And I'm not going to tell you who he is, but I based him on somebody I know who's a fidget, right? And when this person is talking, they click in a pen all the time. The top of the pen, click, click, click. It's really irritating. And the more they get worked up, the more they do it. Anyway, Trevor, he's in his house. And he's thinking to himself, did I lock the door? Did I lock it? Trevor talks slow and feverishly to himself as he stalks the corridor in the gathering gloom. The Record's printing press down in the town grumbles in the back of his mind. Its vibration felt through the soles of his shoes. The house is old, designed by colonial architect Francis Greenway in the English style. Greenway was a forger. This is true. What better person to become an architect? Which he did, and he designed some beautiful buildings in Australia. Anyway, Trevor's house is old, designed by colonial architect Francis Greenway in the English style. Convicts built it from sandstone, hand-cut from rocks quarried from what was now the end of the garden. Each block carried marks that could tell you a story. Grey slate flagstones in the hallway contrast beautifully with chiselled bare stone walls, the colour of Jewish scotch in the dusky light. The house's solid ironbark door at the end of the hall is heavy. When it rains, it swells and is hard to close. Sometimes it takes a while to push it to and lock it. High up in the middle of the door, English fashion, a porthole of thick glass twirls and distorts all you can see. Sometimes it looks as if someone is there just outside. The only way you can be sure is to open the door. But as Trevor often reminded himself, by then it would be too late. He's a warrior, right? By the way, I'm just going to digress a second. Somebody gave me a like yesterday, or the day before, for the previous episode about Astrakhan's Feather. I'm very touched by this, Even if it was a mistake and your hand slipped, I don't care. Thank you for doing that. It doesn't happen often, right? As they say. Anyway, there we go. Right. Trevor's trembling as he stares at the door down the silent hallway. Trevor is in a quandary. Trevor is having the shit scared out of him. He doesn't know whether to stay locked inside like a prisoner or go out and see some friends at the pub. But then he had to remind himself he really didn't have too many friends, though he could drink a lot and try and forget. He shivers. If he went out, he'd have to come back, and by then it will be fully dark, and there are no lights along his long driveway, and in places the trees loop down so low they might touch him. Someone could be in the bushes anywhere along that long driveway. He could drive, but they could walk out in front of his car, suddenly looming, cloaked head down, looking up at the last second and then striking. Trevor's heart beats wildly. He grasps and clutches his chest. It's all too much. A copy of the record has been delivered. He never has it delivered. It wasn't even due in the shops until tomorrow. He can hear the press, feel it humming in his legs. He didn't know who tapped at the door twice. When he'd opened it, the paper was there. The ink was still wet. It stained his fingers. He looked at them, rubbed thumb and forefinger. He shivered. The ink on the paper looked like the dark blood of a dead man. He unfolded the paper with shaking hands. He'd seen the front page story. He groaned and almost sunk to the floor. He almost cried. That's when his heart started to sprint. He panicked, ran around frantically, locking doors and windows, mumbling to himself, heart going bang, bang, bang. At the back of the house, now standing at the long conservatory windows, trying to breathe normally, Trevor watched dust seep through the trees like smoke. He squinted at the darkening tree line beyond the neat lawn. He flinches. Someone was there. He takes a breath and squints, but maybe not. You can imagine anything lurking in the dark violet light. A single bird calls soft until its call dies away. The house, garden and trees smudge towards night. Soon it will be as black out there as the wet ink on the newsprint he holds strangled at his side. The 48-point headline, Guerrilla Type, one word. We'll return to Trevor shortly. Lightning turns a window silver for a second, while two ceiling fans stir the thick heat. One of them clicks every turn. The conference room hums with damp heat. Thunder rumbles overhead. We don't have anything from Dr. Schulp yet, asks Karen. Bob Mullins shakes his head. Okay, so what do we know? She looks at Bob Mullins, Cooper Blackwelder and Benny Benson sitting around an old scarred oak kitchen table. There's someone missing here, she thinks grimly. Goes by the name of Mr. Enthusiasm. She slaps a freshly printed copy of the record on the table. It sounds like a gunshot, and everyone except Bob Mullins jumps. Pardon me. Ah, action at last, says Karen. Cooper Blackwelder scowls at her. Benny scratches his head. Bob Mullins regards her coolly, hands linked over his stomach, thumbs tapping each other slowly, gently. Well, why don't you lead, miss, says Mullins dryly. Karen smiles thinly. It says here, she smooths the crackling paper on the table, Ray Lucas was murdered. He couldn't miss a headline. The single word in 48 Guerrilla Type was like a shout. Murder. Underneath the picture of a smiling, confident Ray Lucas at a presentation a year ago, so Holly had told her. Don't believe everything you read, miss. Karen looks at Mullins. I think it's fair to say he was, don't you? He had a big hole in his head. You do remember that, Sarge? Mullins shifts uneasily in his chair. Never forget it, as long as I live. Karen takes a deep breath. She fancies she can still smell the blood herself. So what we have so far is Gloria Rich, known as Glory, seen kissing in a car with Billy Preston, your consummate frequent flyer. PC Blackwelder gives a loving couple more than a bit of a fright with his stick, tapping it on the window. Has an up-close and personal with Mr. Preston about his grubby ways. Glory gets out and off she goes. According to PC Benson, Karen looks at Benny, numerous people saw her at the fair all by herself, yes? And the dad, her father, how'd that go? Benny looks at Karen, eyes a bit glazed, and thinks about what happened. I have to say that. It's in italics here, so it's obvious. But anyway. It could have been the morning light or his heightened senses strumming like dog wire in a hot, stiff breeze. Benny never knew for sure. But the thin spiral of cigarette smoke came sharply in focus as his cop boots crunched on the grey gravel. He smelt gritty dust and toasty smoke before he saw the pack of Winfield Greys crumpled on the small wooden table upon the deck. I was in the army once, Vietnam. I've seen death, but nothing's ever going to hurt me like this, said the old man. Benny had one foot on the log cabin's veranda step. They trained him to move a hand slow towards a Glock, but he didn't need it, he knew that. How'd you know, he asked. Bob's teak-lined face hoves into view as he leans forward in a rocker. Benny takes another step and a hot bleach board groans like old bone. She knew how to step over that, keep it from making noise, the old man smiled when she came back late. He bows his head and sobs. The whinny between his fingers sizzles. Benny takes 2 strides up onto the deck, eases the dark crimpy smoke from between the old man's nicotine joints and gently touches his shoulder. You mind? Bob Rich shook his head but couldn't speak. Benny made the Winfield glow like a Ferrari brake light. I love that line. I'm going to read it again. Benny made the Winfield glow like a Ferrari brake light. He blew a jet of smoke into the lemon sunlight and coughed, and his head swam and he dropped down into a wobbly bleached chintz chair next to the old man. He was only 24. He'd never smoked and never told anyone their child was dead before. How'd he know? Coop asked later, sucking on his own Winfield Grey, spitting smoke out the side of his mouth, some of it making his eye weep. The V12 burbled, rocking a pursuit car like a baby at the end of the Riches gravel driveway. Cops only come calling with bad news, Benny says. That's what he said. Not like you're going to come with a lotto win. Well, that's true. Coop blows smoke flat against the windscreen. What was your feeling? Benny's back there now in the police conference room. He passes a hand back and forth through his hair a couple of times. He's got nothing to do with it, boss, I'd say. Vietnam vet, as we know. He's not allowed to have guns. Coop snorted. Wouldn't stop a man who thinks a bloke's been fiddling his little girl. But did he know that? Coop shrugs and Karen looks through him as she tries to imagine the way it must have been out there on the road in the gloom and the heat of the storm. Come on, she says softly. You saw her earlier in the car with Preston. Yeah, said Coop, remembering the girl's ragged shorts, whispered panties showing, the long nut brown legs slick, glistening in the heat inside that car. He licked his lips. It is a bit sexual, I know. Karen was back from the road, looking at him, her eyes all snake-like. Coop snorted as he jerked back to the present. So why would the father do it? Asked Karen quietly. He didn't, did he? Karen turns and looks at Bob Mullins. No, I don't think he did. She walks to the whiteboard and taps Gloria's picture. You might take on the bloke, but you certainly wouldn't kill your own daughter for what? Snogging the wrong bloke? Or snogging any bloke for that matter? Nah, it's not the father. This is really nothing to do with the girl, said Mullins quietly. Karen closes her eyes for a second or two, small smile on her lips. Looks like she was turned on, thought Cluper Blackwelder, who caught Bob Mullins looking at him out the corner of an old man's bloodshot eye. She said, no, this is down to Ray Lucas, easy intended. Let's concentrate on him, who he really is, what he's been up to, above all, who wanted him killed. Our finest spent the afternoon interviewing fair folks, stallholders. Yes, said Mullins. Coop and Benny, Kath and Kim. Nothing too much there. Karen nods. They all remembered her, but after the fair, she isn't seen again until we find her in Ray Lucas's crash car. Actually, it's his wife's crash car, though I'm not too sure that's important. Might be mistaken identity, says Benny. Karen smiles at him. Good point. Yes, it's possible someone was after the wife and thought she was driving the Merc. You've met her, said Bob Mullins. What's your feeling? Karen nibbles her bottom lip. You know, when I got there, a man was with her. They were hugging each other. Mullins leans forward, a frown on his face. A man? Yeah, crop grey hair. I reckon around late 40s, maybe early 50s. Fit looking. Bit of a beer belly, though. Disappeared fast when I arrived, but I saw them kissing. Mullins frowns. Kissing? Karen looks at him, sucking each other's lips. Coop brays like a donkey until Karen flicks him a glance. Looked a bit like George Clooney, says the Sarge. Karen laughs. How'd you driving a silver Tesla S, electric, no sound. Karen stops laughing. You know him. Mullins leans back in his chair. You've seen Christ. Do do do. And that's the end of it. 13 minutes. If you're still there, give me a like. Thank you.